When it comes to investing in physical property, there are a huge number of things that you need to take into consideration. Everything from how the property fits into your own personal cash flow and tax position, to the macroeconomic and the political factors which can impact property prices. And all of these factors are really important and they need to be considered. But in today's video, I want to talk about one specific factor which I think creates long-lasting value in a property. But before I jump into it, you first of all need to understand the breakdown of how a property is valued. Hello guys, Brad here from The Guided Investor. Welcome back to the channel for another video. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button because I post regular videos about how you can do more with your money. When you buy a property, you can essentially split the value of the property into two parts: the value of the land and the value of the house that sits on the land. And from an investment perspective, it's the value of the land that is important. Over time, it's the land that appreciates in value and the house typically depreciates in value. So this is why whenever people buy a property, I always try and encourage people to find a property that holds most of its value in the land and not the house. Buying a brand new house is a bit like buying a brand new car. You're gonna lose wealth over time to depreciation. And this is also why I try to encourage people to never buy apartments, because you essentially don't really own any land. All you're buying is nicely arranged bricks and mortar. So now that we understand the land is the valuable part of a property, how do we ensure you buy the right piece of land? And the answer to that question is pretty simple: scarcity. For me, scarcity is the most important factor to consider when buying a house, because if you think about it, scarcity creates value, and it doesn't just apply to land, it also applies to many different other asset classes. Take gold for example. A chunk of gold, a physical chunk of gold, is actually pretty useless to the average person, but everyone still wants it. And why is that? Because gold holds its value, and the only reason it holds its value is because it's rare. If every single person could go dig in their backyard and find a chunk of gold, then gold would no longer be worth something because it's lost its scarcity. Going back to property and more specifically land, the scarcity of the location at which your property is located is going to be one of the key drivers as to how that property performs from a valuation perspective moving forward. And really, there is three things that I look for when it comes to property in terms of getting a piece of land that's relatively scarce. The first is distance to the CBD, the second is distance to natural resources like the ocean or rivers, and the third is distance to infrastructure, things like schools, highways, parks, that kind of stuff. All of these areas are highly sought after and have limited space available. And if you can tick multiple boxes, then you are going to be onto a real winner. So let me give you an example of how this works. Here in Perth, our most expensive suburb is Dalkeith, with a median house price of $2.29 million. And if we have a look at the map, Dalkeith is bang on the river, a stone's throw to the ocean, and a short drive to the CBD. This is three massive ticks. If the property market as a whole goes through a downturn, then these scarce properties are still going to feel the impact of that downturn, just to a lesser extent, because there's always going to be some demand for these scarce properties from both a buying perspective and a renting perspective. On the other hand, if you purchase a house in a remote location, then the land is not scarce at all. There is plenty of it available. Take Byford for example, which is another local Perth suburb. Now, Byford essentially is in the middle of nowhere. There's plenty of land available out there. And if we compare the trend of the median house price between Byford and Dalkeith over the last few years, you can see a notable difference. Byford has typically been on a downward trend, whereas Dalkeith has jumped around a little bit but remained fairly strong. Now, obviously these charts are not gospel, as there can be many factors impacting the median sales price, such as reducing block sizes. However, in my opinion, the key problem with Byford is that new subdivided blocks of land are getting released regularly because there's so much land available out there. Now, obviously scarcity is a great thing to have, but you also have to work within your budget. And the average person can't afford to buy a house in a suburb like Dalkeith. but you can still apply these principles within your means. When I purchased my first home, I understood the value of scarcity and I applied this to my purchase. So what I did is I took a map of Perth, I drew a circle around the CBD with a 15-kilometre radius, and I looked at all the suburbs which I could afford to buy in within that circle. So there were a lot of suburbs that got removed, but there were some suburbs that were left. So with those suburbs that were left, I applied my second level of filters, which was things like proximity to family and friends, proximity to the shops, and I narrowed down my purchase, or where I bought my house, that way. Now, my first house wasn't my ideal house, but it did tick a lot of boxes for me. And because I believe the land is somewhat scarce, I do have an intention to hold that property for the long term because I believe that I will create value from that land over a long period of time. When I purchased my second house, I went through the same process, but this time my budget was a little bit bigger, so I was able to get something fairly close to the CBD and fairly close to the ocean. And again, I believe I'll create value in the property over the long term. So when you buy a property, just remember it is the land that holds the value, and the location of that land is what's going to drive the value of the property moving forward. So if you can afford to buy a brand new house, then that's awesome, but that is a luxury item. And from an investment perspective, you're gonna wanna focus on the land more than the house. But that's it for me today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and I will see you guys in the next one.